recording this computer. Hi, Erev Tov, Shalom, good evening from Jerusalem, Israel. This is Lowell Joseph Gallen, founder of the Root and Branch Association Limited. I would like to welcome our viewers and listeners worldwide and our live Zoom studio audience to this evening's program in our Root and Branch Association Limited English Language Conference and Lecture Series, broadcasting from Jerusalem, Israel, and now celebrating our first quarter century, first 25 years from 1995 until 2020. Today is Wednesday, September 2nd, 2020, in the Gregorian calendar, and the 14th day of Elul 5780 in the Israelite Hebrew calendar. We are coming to the end of the 5th year of our current 7 Shemitah/sabbatical year cycle. And in 2 weeks, we begin 5781, the 6th of the 7 years. We are broadcasting from the land of Israel, city of God, Jerusalem, Hill of the Priests, Givat Hananiah, Abu Tur, overlooking Mount Moriah, where we believe that the third and final Israelite temple of Jerusalem will soon be under reconstruction, as per the prophet Ezekiel's vision expressed in chapters 40 through 48, and stand forever. The Root and Branch Association promotes the study and practice of universal Jewish Israelite teachings within the framework of the Universal Noahide Covenant and Laws. Please see Genesis chapter 9, and affirmation of God's land, Torah, and people covenants with his chosen people, Israel. Our speaker for this evening's program is Rabbi Naftali Moshe Kasorla, who will speak on the Mussar movement, a movement of the hearts and minds, some of its teachings, and the personalities that led it. Now, I'd like to give a special thanks to an old friend of Les and mine, Mr. Larry Pfeffer. We call him the Budapester Rebbe, the teacher Larry, who put together this wonderful curriculum for the start of our Zoom programming, which began on July 26th, and we'll take a break for the Chagim. Now, I would like to welcome our program chair, Dr. Les Glassman, who will introduce Rabbi Kasorla.
Well, thank you very much, Lal, and I'd like to second that. I'd like to also thank Larry Pfeffer for helping to organize the programs with the most incredible speakers that we're going to actually hear one of tonight. We're all privileged to hear. So Rav Naftali Moshe Kasorla, who is born in America and studied at the prestigious Mir Yeshiva here in Yerushalayim. And after your marriage, then you went to Brisk and you learned under the tutelage of Rav Meir Soloveitchik, Zichron Lebracha. Currently, you're a Maggid Shir in the Yeshiva Tiferes Israel in Beis Yisrael. You also serve as the director of the Halachic Guidance Program of Kolal Toras Chaim in Yerushalayim. We have the great honor as well to have your mom, who's watching from Malay Adamim. Welcome, and it's always a pleasure to have one's mishpacha and your support from what could be better than to have your mom, who's getting a lot of nachas from you and will be sharing in the nachas from your talk tonight. So the topic of tonight is the Mussar movement, and as Lal mentioned, it was a movement of the hearts and minds, some of the teaching of its personalities that led it, and had a profound impact in Jewish life. Rav, we look forward to hearing. I'm sure you're going to be speaking about Israel Salanta, the founder of the Mussar movement, and what the Mussar movement did for Yiddishkeit and for Judaism, and the incredible important role that it played and it plays to this very day. So without further ado, I want to introduce our esteemed speaker for tonight, Rav Naftali Kasorla. Thank you so much.
Okay, so thank you so much. It really is a tremendous pleasure and an honor to speak about this topic of Mussar, which to a degree burns in my heart. It affects my day-to-day life. It affects the way I relate to the people around me, my family, my students. And it's something that didn't come from nowhere because, as mentioned before, my mother is here. As much as the name Kasorla should, it's not a classic Ashkenazi name. And it's not. I'm a scion actually of Ladino-speaking Spanish Jewry, Spanish Jews from, as far as I can tell, about 14 or 13 generations of Sephardic rabbis going back. And yet somehow I'm connected to the Lithuanian movement that was in the Lithuanian milieu. And the truth is, I think that tells you to a degree the universality, talking about universal ideas, that someone can come from so far away, from almost be from a different genetic experience, and yet still be able to connect to the amazing ideas that are impactful for people's lives, for my life in particular. And I think that's exactly a beautiful lead-in to the topic that we have tonight. Now, I want to paint for you a picture. I want to give you two examples of two great men who were students of Reb Salanter, who, in a certain way, they themselves, but it's not limited to them, they're emblematic of exactly what Yisrael set down within the Mussar movement, and what was the overarching guidelines, the overarching ideals within the Mussar movement. So picture the scene like this. It was shortly after the passing of Nosson Finkel, who was called by students lovingly the Alter Slabot. In his attic, the students go in, and as they go to collect his things after passing away, they find a book. They find a sefer, almost if not a completely written, a fully finished and written sefer, that will later be known as the Or HaTzafon. Well, it's called Or HaTzafon. It was a light that was almost hidden. What was Tzafon? It was a light that eventually will be. What was this light? This sefer was really the entire philosophy of the Alter of Slabodka. Now, he didn't plan on putting it out. He wrote it. He didn't tell it to anybody. He didn't in any way whatsoever show it to anybody. It was totally found by, as we call it, Hashgacha Pratis. Now, this person, we have to talk about, there's a duality here. The Alter of Slabodka himself is a very public figure, right? In the sense that his whole life was public education. He founded schools. He was a part and parcel of his community. He was somebody who was within and among the people itself. And yet we find that there are parts of him that was concealed. There's this part, not just this part. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, who actually lived at one point, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky was Rosh Yeshiva of Torah Vodaas many years ago in America, who eventually just, he moved out to Muncie and became a tremendous Baal Eitzah, a tremendous source of direction for many, many people in America. He said he lived with the Alter about it. And he said, I didn't even know who he was. That this concept that you can be within the four amos of this person, within the four cubits of this person, and yet at the end of the day, you may not know them. Now, this duality of being public and yet also being private and being concealed. And I'll give you another story. Rav Yosef Yozel Horowitz, also known as the Alter of Nevardik, a personal favorite of mine, he sits alone in a cabin late at night. He learns all day and all night. This man, after his wife had just passed away in childbirth, was spurred to this desire, I guess, to hide away in a cabin, to isolate himself entirely, to literally isolate himself. The initial plan was to be there for 7 years. You know how long he was there for? Before the authorities he was reported on by certain people, certain elements that were not happy, that they were scared of. We called it Chilul Hashem. They reported to authorities, and he only lasted a year and a half. But can you imagine, for a year and a half, this man? That means he was able to be by himself. And yet what happened? After he left, after he was inspired to start yeshivas, he ended up starting a network of 70 yeshivas throughout Europe. He would travel around Europe collecting students. He was fearless in the face of the turmoil that was the pre-World War I era and post-World War I era. And yet this person, again, he's able to be by himself, to be in complete solitude, and yet he's completely enmeshed among the people. He's completely able to be given to public service. And this is the theme that I want to color tonight. This duality between being a public figure and being a private person. And we want to know, from where did these ideals derive? Where do we get these concepts from? This idea of the dualities. So first, let's talk about the Mussar movement in general. Now it's very easy. We're tempted to almost approach the Mussar movement. It's kind of like a historical phenomenon. right? Which is, I really try not to do that when I talk about the Mussar movement, because you could just list names and dates and even controversies, and there were quite a few that's human foibles that were, whether or not this yeshiva wanted Mussar, that yeshiva wanted Mussar, was this the rabbi's opinion about it? We could do that, but ultimately anybody who understands the mindset of a Mussarnik, which is the term that's used within the Mussar world, we understand that's way above and beyond just names and dates. I mean, instead what we're dealing here is real people that embodied certain ideals, that lived certain values, that were willing to die for those values, and were willing, more importantly, to live with those values. And I think ultimately that's what characterizes the Muslim movement. But let's talk about the overall aim of the Muslim movement, or let's describe what the Muslim movement was. So the Muslim movement, to a degree, in its aim and its purpose, was the Lithuanian take on spiritual renewal. When we talk about spiritual renewal, we talk about, and usually it's in reference to the Hasidic movement. And to a degree, it's almost akin and a counterbalance to the Hasidic movement. Inherently, I guess, in order to be, if you are a movement by definition, I guess you are an anti-establishment movement. But because, and maybe we'll talk about it a little later on, but the Lithuanian perspective of I guess, the worldview of a Litva is very much within the element of the establishment. That's what we'll talk about. The Hasidic movement was, to a degree, not just to a degree, it was quite obvious, quite overt. There was a direct challenge to the establishment. But because, like we mentioned before, the Muslim movement had arose within this particular setting, this particular cultural milieu, it deserves its own thorough treatment. And the truth is, I'm not going to be able to present that tonight in any scholarly way, in any thorough way. Maybe it'll bring me back. That's a plug to bring me back. But ultimately, maybe we'll talk about at least the overarching ideas and what underpinned its founding and how exactly it was shaped. Now, the Muslim movement was conceived, as you mentioned before, by Bisrar Salanter. And his was a call to focus on the ethical laws of the Torah. That mere study of the laws itself is not enough really to engage, not really to engage the heart. If it only stays within the realm of the, I guess, I wouldn't say practical, I wouldn't even say intellectual, I would say within the world of the halacha, which means to say that if I'm chayiv or I'm not chayiv, which means to say, am I obligated or am I not obligated? That to a degree, if you learn halacha, if you learn the system of halacha, to a degree, that's the only issue. The Shulchan Aruch is not going to say, well, if you have a underlying motivation as to why you're doing it and you're trying to get money out of the person, then you shouldn't do it. The Shulchan Aruch will never say that. The Shulchan Aruch says mutter or aser. And Reb Salanter saw that over a period of time, this was, I guess, corrupting people's actions, that we weren't enthusing the ethical ideas within the halacha itself. And Reb Salanter held and felt that just as one learns a Gemara passage, and within the yeshiva environment, when we learn a passage, we try to really dissect it. We try to notice every single subtlety to the halacha. The question is, though, is that do we do that for the Mussar Svarim? Do we do that for the ethical laws of the Torah? It doesn't seem to be. Let me give you maybe a small example. Within the Parshiyot, right? The author of Nevardik explains, actually, let's say by Eliezer. Eliezer, as we know, the Midrash says that Eliezer desired, Eliezer, the servant of Avram, desired that he really wanted Yitzchak, Isaac, to be his son-in-law. He wanted to be the father, the mechutan, I guess we say in Ivrit, the mechutan, together with Yitzchak. I apologize. I'm sorry. Together with Avram Avinu. Now, the Midrash explains that really Eliezer did not want to go and to take Rivka. He did not want to go and take Rivka. Why did he want to take Rivka? Because he wanted Yitzchak to marry his own daughter. So the Mefarshim explain that he says, "Ulai, maybe she won't come back with me. Perhaps she'll come back with me." So what happens later on, as we see, he davens to Hashem, he prays to Hashem, "Please send me a sign that Rivka is the chosen one for my master's son." So what happens? The Torah says he gives over the nizamim. He gives over, I guess, the jewelry and the different beautiful things that were given as a bridal gift, and he gives it over right away. And then he asks, "Bat miyat, who's your father?" After he finds out it's Betuel, okay, then he goes and meets Betuel. Later on, however, though, as the Torah recounts, later on when Eliezer tells over the entire story of him praying and Rivka coming out with the water and giving over, and then he says, what does he say? He adds something very different. And Rashi and all of the Mepharshim pick up on this. Right. So Eliezer says First, I asked her, who is your father? Basmia, who is your father? And then I gave over the jewelry. So all of the Farshim tried to deal with this. Why is Eliezer changing the Seder of the, the events of how it happened? Why is he doing that? So Rashi explains because he was embarrassed, and therefore because it doesn't make any sense inherently to give over the jewelry and the bridle before you even know who the daughter is, before you even know who the girl is. And yes, you can be confident that it's the daughter of the person you're looking for, and you're fulfilling the mission that Avram sent you to do. But ultimately, it's not your money. So what are you doing? So that's why he switched it up when he told over the story. But the altar of Nevardik is a beautiful idea. As I mentioned previously, Eliezer had a negia, as we call it. That's the term that we use within the Mussar world, a negia, an underlying motive. And the negia gets into all of our different motive actions, and it can affect everything that we do. And we are not even aware of it half the time. Halavai should be even half the time, but we're not even aware of it. Eliezer, however, was aware of it. And he understood that if I leave it open, the possibility that something might happen because I really want Yitzchak as my son-in-law. So how am I gonna? Maybe I'm not gonna fulfill the mission that I have to do. Avram Avinu sent me to take Rivka back. So what had happened? So it says the Alpha in the Nevardik, because he felt the negia, he first gave over the nizamin. And it's not your money. He said, I'll pay it back. I'll work harder. I'll take the debt almost in order to lock myself into this whole entire process, because I'm too scared that my negia, that my underlying motive will affect my actions. That's a very Mussar way of understanding it. It totally changes the entire hergish, the feeling that comes from that entire episode. This is a very important distinction. Others say, well, he was nervous, he was embarrassed. Okay, you could theoretically learn out things from this, but that entire, I guess, that the entire description, the entire framing of that story, it's absolutely different. And that's what Rabbi Salanter wanted us to do. Rabbi Salanter wanted us to approach these things with the underlying, to be just as nuanced and to be just as sensitive to the nuances about the Torah episodes, as much as it was just reading it and understanding it. And Rabbi Salanter, as we mentioned before, believed that delving into each midah, into each attribute that a person has in an overt way, it would seep into the unconscious mind and would then influence our actions. As previously mentioned, well, I actually didn't mention this before. I actually wanted to mention this, which is by the Hasidic movement. There's a lot of positive writing about the Hasidic movement, because people, I think, tend, this is my personal opinion, within parentheses, I find that there's a tremendous draw towards things that are anti-establishment, things that are upending the apple cart. So the Hasidic movement, to a degree, is the absolute Jewish, most beautiful form of, going in and totally upending the entire thing. And the truth is, initially, they were a small minority, but they eventually became the entire, almost the entire Eastern Europe. It's a tremendous thing, right? But to a degree, and especially today, nowadays, the whole concept of Jewish renewal, of people that are very involved in neo-Hasidus, as we call it today, people, we think it's new, but it's not all that new. Yet when we're assessing the Muslim movement, there's a little bit less of a feeling toward it. Maybe it's mirroring the feelings of the Litvak. Yeah, if anybody here is a cold, I assume from South Africa, Mr. Yes, I'm correct in that assumption. But there is almost a stoic, relationship back to the Litvish, and there's not necessarily even positive approaches towards it. Now, one could even say by the Muslim movement, and almost as a doctor declares in the ER, the Muslim movement is dead. But is that really the case? As we mentioned previously, it's above mere names and dates. It's above just sequential historical events that happen, and this place opened and this place closed. It's about the people, and it lives within the people itself. So let's try and dive in to the end, to the historical founding of the Muslim movement within the personality of Rizal Salanter. Now, the father of the Muslim movement, as we mentioned previously, was Rizal Salanter. His real name is Lipkin. Now, how do you get the name Salant? We'll explain later on. He was born in 1810 in the town of Zagar, the son of Reb Zev Wolf Lipkin, who himself is a tremendous Talmud scholar. And Reb Yisrael grew up steeped in the Lithuanian tradition. Now, this is something that I want to touch on a little bit. Having been born in less than 15 years after the passing of the great giant of Lithuania, the Vilna Gaon, who he himself passed away only in 1797, I apologize. 15 years apart, that's very little time. I mean, we're living in the shadow of, say, from the American context, I can speak largely from American context. We're living in the shadow of Moshe Feinstein. living in the shadow, as we mentioned previously, as the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Here at the store, we're living in the shadow of Rav Shach. We're living in the shadow of back in America again, Rav Joseph B. Soloveitchik. These tremendous, great people who cast such a large shadow and shaped the entire history of the entire generation, and not just generation, generations later on, students and students and students. And the Vilna Gaon's impact cannot be understated, both in Jewish lore and even actually in Lithuanian history books. And actually, I'm happy my mom is here because I have to give her appreciation. I want to show you this book that my mom gave me. I call it my Shabbos book, my Friday night Shabbos book, because this is the book I fall asleep to. It is so boring. I love it, but it's boring as anything. Puts me right to bed. I never realized I cared so much about that. I learned so much about really random, Lithuanian, Celtic and Gaelic, different types of tribes. It's tremendous. I love it. This book was commissioned, just to tell you, this book was commissioned by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Lithuania. Now I'm going to just read you a little bit of a excerpt from over here. The excerpt is very interesting. It says the Vilna Gaon's
What's the name of the book?
As bland as Lithuania was, it's the history of Lithuania. There's this. It doesn't get any more boring than that. But I love it. I happen to love it. Okay, so here's how it goes. Can anyone hear me? Everyone can hear me? Okay. The Vilna Gaon's authority seems to have been the deciding factor in the fact that Lithuanian Jews, the Litvaks, by the way, even Lithuanian Gentiles call themselves Litvaks. It's very interesting. So the Vilna Gaon seems to be the deciding factor for the Litvaks to be considered exalted Jews, standing out from the rest. I see Mr. Glassman is very happy to hear this. Standing out from the rest by their strict observance of religious tradition, their intellectual rationality, and respect for education.
As a Hungarian, me and Larry Pfeffer are going to have to object to that.
I that's a challenge I'm willing to take, and I'm the third party. I'm the I guess the disapproval of that I'm a Sephardi at the end of the day. Okay, but the rumors that all of the sages of Vilnius knew. Now there are rumors that the entire city of Vilna, even what we call the Balabatim, the laymen, were all familiar with the 64 volumes of the Talmud by heart. That was not spread in vain, says this book. Again, this is coming from the Ministry of Tourism of the state of the country of Lithuania, right? Furthermore, the Talmud was studied in Litvish Yiddish, which again, they're very proud of, a dialect of Yiddish that formed in Lithuania. Moreover, it was namely the Litvish dialect that eventually became the basis for modern standard Yiddish. I know there is a linguist here that I would appreciate that. Now, the concept of Litvak that is used today is also related to the name of the place of the residence of a Jew from Lithuania, coming from the Great Duchy of Lithuania after the Union of Lublin. However, the term also began to be referenced. Okay, so what's my point? My point is to understate the real impact that the Vilna Gaon had is almost like you can't. I'd have to give 3 lectures to be able to explain the greatness and the absolute impact, the reverberations that even today, and there's been, of course, a rebirth. I guess more recently, you can be directed to the publication of the Mishnah Berurah, to where the Chafetz Chaim tried very hard to, number one, reconnect back to the laws and halachas of the Vilna Gaon, but also to retrace the true Mussar, the true tradition as to exactly what the Vilna Gaon did and didn't do. And even the Chafetz Chaim went back to the city of Vilna, met a person who knew someone who did know the Vilna Gaon, and he wrote down everything. And the Chafetz Chaim then told over that information all to Rav Aaron Kotler, and he told it over to one of my rebbeim, Rabbi Chiel Per from Far Rockaway. So there's a whole entire absolute tradition coming from this. Now, in around 1822, Rabbi Yisrael was 12 years old and was presumably ready for higher learning. Of course, especially in those days, we'll talk about in a second the idea of the economic issues of a person growing up in these towns and what was the cachet of learning. Now, at this point, the Yeshiva of Volozhin had been open for over 20 years. However, Rabbi Yisrael never studied in the Yeshiva of Volozhin, the preeminent yeshiva, nor would he even later. Instead, he was sent to study in the city of Salant, which is exactly where he gets his name. Under the tutelage of Reb Tzvi Hirschbreider, who's himself a tremendous Talmud Chacham, he had a lot of Svarim, and he had many students. Apparently, there's actually a common thing to do, especially in this particular city, as we find other scholars that were sent to study in the city of Salant. And as noted before, that he did not learn Volozhin, but don't take this to mean that Reb Salanter, again, which just connects to the point, that Reb Salanter wasn't highly influenced by the greatest scholars to ever come out of the Yeshiva of Volozhin. Most specifically, I refer to Rabbi Yosef Zundel Salant, who was born in 1786 and passed away in 1866 in the land of Israel. He's buried on the Mount of Olives. Now he's referred to in the Mussar world as Reb Zundel, like, and affectionately. We have these affectionate names in the Mussar world. We call them Itzela. These names that sound to be like you're referring to like your 4-year-old son, Shmelka. Yeah, I call my son Chaim Yankala. Right? Why do we? Because it's a sign of admiration. It's a sign of love. Now this Reb Zundel is a stuff of legend, really. And as we shall see later, Reb Yisrael really connected to these aspects. Reb Yisrael Salater and Reb Zundel met in the city of Salon. Now, to a degree, the parallels between the early Hasidic movement and the origins of the Muslim movement are almost uncanny. Now, what do I mean by this? Just like Reb Yisrael Baal Shem carried himself as basically a simple thing, making a very small livelihood just from being a melamed, just from being a teacher for children. Reb Zundel himself carried himself with the same exact sense of simplicity. Now, what do I mean by that? We'll talk in a second. We'll discuss further, but I want to explain, before we get to the simpleness of Reb Zundel, let's talk about the things that were not simple. As a young man, Reb Zundel studied in the yeshiva of Volozhin, who initially actually learned together in the same kibbutz with the Vilna Gaon himself. Later on, when the yeshiva opened, he went and studied together with Reb Chaim Volozhiner. And after Reb Chaim Volozhiner, these people were just beyond our comprehension. I'm not going to explain. I'm going to take it I'm going to assume that these names are, because that's not necessarily the topic of tonight. Now, following Reb Chaim Volozhiner's death in 1821, Reb Zundel would make trips to study together with Rabbi Akiva Eger. Akiva Eger, who to a degree took up the mantle, I guess, as the great Lithuanian genius after the passing of Reb Salater. I guess there was a certain vacancy, a certain vacuum that was created, and Akiva Eger, he didn't have to fill a vacuum. He was himself a great genius. Now, this tells us, by the way, that Reb Zundel, in studying with this tremendous connection between all these great sages, all these great Talmid Chachamim, that he was not somebody simple. And yet, despite his learning prowess, Reb Zundel refused to accept any rabbinical position. He ran a small business. Some even say he was a day laborer. Which, you understand what that means, a day laborer? You bring a package here, you cut down some trees over here. It's nothing work. And this himself only gave him a little bit of a meager living. He chose to spend most of his day immersed in Torah and Mussar. Now, naturally, Reb Zundel, as we mentioned before, did not wear any rabbinical garb. He himself even admitted for the first time seeing Reb Zundel, not even recognizing the greatness of this Reb Zundel. Reb Zundel kept himself tremendously concealed. And this, we arrive at what we mentioned before, this concept of duality. This is where we have the first archetype within the Mussar world, within the Mussar movement, this idea of hiddenness, of extreme piety, of taking extreme measures to conceal that hiddenness. And I want to share actually a beautiful picture that really, I don't know if it necessarily proves or is a perfect example of the true, the term that we use is tzidkus. Because that's the term that catches everything. The piety that Reb Zundel had. I can't say, again, I can't promise that it's a perfect example of it, but I think it really speaks towards his piety. If you look at his kever on Har HaZeisim, on Mount of Olives, you take a look, it's not just meager, it's almost like embarrassing. We just mentioned somebody who he learned the Chavrusa with Akiva Eger. He's a student of the Vilna Gaon. He learned together with Chaim Volozhiner. And the best thing that they could write, not the people, I imagine, and this is my assumption, I have nothing to back this up, but you know what? 2020, I'm going to have some fun. That Reb Zundel, is very possible Reb Zundel, when he came to Israel, he didn't reveal himself at all. He totally hid, he totally concealed himself. To the extent that maybe, if possibly, again, with a caveat, that when he was buried, nobody even knew really who this person was. And that's the way he wanted it. Can you imagine that? Let that kind of simmer a little bit. I make a habit of my own. I like to go to Har Menuchos. One of my Rebbeim, if not my Rebbe, was buried there. Gedalia Edamer, that my mother knows. Great Talmid Chacham, and the Alter of Navardik was even reburied there, and I love to go to his kever as well. But I go there. I'm not to say anything negative. Of course, it's very good, important for the grandchildren, the great grandchildren, to come back to those graves and to see what their predecessors did, and it's inspiring for them. But my gosh, it's Mamash and Megillah. They did this and they did that and they did this and they did that. Not one thing is left undone. Mamash, if they sneezed at 2:00 in the afternoon, possibly it's even there as well. And the idea again, I'm glad they have a great crowd. Now this concept is, let's take a step back. This idea that somebody is hidden, is concealed, is quiet about what they do, it's not a new thing in Jewish history. I mean, let's not pretend we've invented the wheel over here. This concept is not unique in Jewish history, right? Many great and pious people have attempted to dress in non-rabbinical garb, even sport a beard. The Ramchal famously shaved his beard. We don't know exactly. There's reports about different lengths. He cut it a little bit. Was shaved entirely. But some have suggested for this purpose because he didn't want to look like a rabbinic figure. He wanted to go among the crowd and no one to know who he was. Later, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik himself, who was the Rav of the city of Brisk, he himself did not wear the classic Rosh Hashiva hat. So, what's the big deal that Reb Zundel was completely hidden and quiet and this like that? But as previously stated, the Muslim movement arose in a very particular cultural milieu, a European world of aristocracy, of hierarchy, not just within the Jewish world. Believe me, unfortunately and unfortunately, the Jewish world, to a degree, mirrors the outside world. And just like within the historical context or the cultural context of the surrounding environment that was all about, you have money, were you an aristocrat, or were you a serf? That was literally, to a degree, the only decision. And if you were born a serf, you'd be a serf. If you were born into aristocracy, then you would stay aristocratic, despite your actions proving otherwise. Now, so let's think about it. Within the Jewish world, it's the same thing. To a degree, the hierarchy is of Talmudic intelligentsia. Are you part of it or not? To not put on a display of elitism or to assign respect to signify what status you are is a radical concept. It's almost locking yourself into a certain not just economic perspective, but a cultural perspective. It's almost invaluable. Your own children. How do you make shidduch for your own children? The greatest cachet that one had to make respectable shidduchim outside of having money was for one to be considered to be a great scholar. Yet Reb Zundel refused to take any rabbinical position. This was a radical action.
The traditional Jewish position that you were describing is more similar to a meritocracy. It's not like a feudal system, which is hard division of classes that depends on where you're born into, what family you're born into. What you're describing is somewhat of a meritocracy.
So you're right. I'm not trying to say it's a one-to-one comparison of the outside of the Gentile culture within the Jewish culture. You're right. There is, because that's the chiddush. To a degree, that is a absolute novelty within the Jewish world, that you can even have the concept of rising up in the ranks. And yes, but the truth is, even to a degree, having the brains, and we talked about the idea of Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, somebody who was born with quote unquote low intelligence, who really worked on himself to become the Rosh Hashiva eventually of the Yeshiva of Volozhin. We didn't talk about that before, but even those stories, let's be honest, it's not true. He was a tremendous. Anybody who was able to get past 9 years old and not be sent to become an apprentice was already showing signs of success. It's almost an impossibility from an economic standpoint. So what we're trying to say is that to agree, the smarts was an aristocratic thing. It may not have been yes, you are part of a certain stratus of the society, but ultimately, let's be honest. Yes, but at 9 years old, who's giving the opportunity? When you're starving, very few people are given the opportunity to prove their worth. Okay, so but point taken. I definitely agree with you. Point taken. Now, but more than that, even if we're not, let's take a step back again. Even from that, even if someone were not in any official rabbinical position, that doesn't preclude you from having a position of hashpah, as we call it, a position of influence. Famously, the Vilna Gaon himself had no official position in the city of Vilna, and yet he had students that surrounded him. He allowed them in. Apparently, he didn't hide himself, which is exactly what Reb Zundel was doing. Reb Zundel was attempting very, very, very clearly to hide himself, to conceal himself. And that's the point. Reb Zundel didn't even try or angle for that type of approach. Now, Reb Yisrael, studying in Salant, was enamored by Reb Zundel. Following him around, he said he would notice, the Beis Medrash, he would leave at a particular period of time. And, for a while, I go, he's a batman, what is he doing, right? One time, after a period of time, he followed him. And he noticed, and he saw, not just noticed, he watched him from afar, that there was a man who at that exact same hour had a wagon. And it was at a very steep hill, and that's his route for milk or whatever he was doing. And Reb Zundel was able to time it perfectly, that he would always be there to help him up on the hill. Did Reb Zundel tell anybody? Did Reb Zundel come back and say, by the way, you know what I just did? I just met a nice guy, and not a word, not a peep. He's willing to take the risk that people will think he's a batlin, that people think he's a total time waster, than to be somebody who is absolutely 100% involved in beautiful chassadim, beautiful acts of kindness. There's other stories where he would wake up so early in the morning before the market would open. He would clear the streets with stones in order so the rocks wouldn't injure the horses' feet. Who was thinking about that? Zundel was thinking about that. But the moment of all these things, but the moment that changed Rabbi Yisrael's life and his life trajectory is legend in the Mussar world. The story goes that once Rabbi Zundel was meditating in the forest, as he often did, when the young Rabbi Yisrael followed him unobtrusively, tried not to, to catch him, to see what his Rebbe, at the time, he had already recognized his greatness, what he was doing. Lost in reflection, Rabbi Zundel didn't even notice that behind him until a certain point. Quickly, Rabbi Zundel turned around to Rabbi Yisrael and said, Rabbi Yisrael, learn Mussar. That's all he said, learn Mussar. Rabbi Yisrael said, that pierced my heart more than anything that I had heard up until that point. That was the moment, and he told later on to his students, that was the moment that changed my entire life. That this would be my life's mission, to take my concepts of Mussar, the concepts of Chesed, the concepts of thinking about the Torah deeply, and to make it a worldwide mission. Now, the second archetype, this is the first archetype, the idea of concealment, the idea of hiddenness. But the second archetype and what would form the underlying values of the Mussar movement is, of course, Rabbi Yisrael himself. Now let's talk about Rabbi Yisrael's, just his entire, what his approach was. What did he do with his life? Eventually, as Rabbi Yisrael grew, he would soon actually become recognized as one of the greatest scholars in Europe itself. And while we only have a few non-Mussar related Torah ideas from him, it is clear that he was considered from the elite in learning. We have some ideas, if I remember correctly. I was actually asking a friend of mine that's in the lecture right now, which is maybe in Bava Metzia, maybe I think in Yavamis. So there's few that are kind of scattered throughout. It's a fun thing, like when the yeshiva guys learn these topics, and we get to hear a non-Mussar idea from Social Life. It's like, wow, it's tremendous. It's a great opportunity. And so at around 32 years old, in 1842, Yisrael was appointed the Rosh Yeshiva of the Mills Yeshiva. It's called the Tomchei Torah in the city of Vilna. As we mentioned previously, the Yeshiva of Vilna was the Jerusalem of Lita. It was considered the proverbial major leagues of Torah scholarship. This would be, of course, though, however, meaning he could have theoretically stayed there, maybe even found a different position here and there. Very common to create a group of students and then to just kind of bounce around from town to town, depending on where the best parnassa was. But that's not the path that Yisrael took. Yisrael will go on to travel constantly throughout Lithuania and eventually throughout Western Europe, which is a very interesting chiddush, very interesting novelty about Yisrael, that although he was in the Lithuanian milieu, he felt the need to travel to Germany, as we explained now, Berlin, Memel, Halberstadt, Paris, even was a period of time Paris. And just to mention, by the way, that Yisrael struggled with almost crippling depression. I wouldn't say crippling because you see how much he did despite the depression he had. He had severe depression that he actually went to Paris to treat for 2 years. He ended up taking a rabbinical position there, but while he was there, he was trying to get therapy for the things that he was doing, the things that he was going through. And he went to Friedrichstadt, and eventually, when he passed away, he did not pass away back at home. He passed away in the city of Königsberg. Now, it's very interesting that Yisrael seemingly, not just seemingly, it's almost overt. He did not follow the path that his Rebbe Reb Zundel, that his Rebbe Reb Zundel laid down. He did not become this concealed figure. He did not become this hidden person. And it could very well be that he had a certain self-awareness. And I would hope the founder of the Muslim movement had self-awareness to know that that wasn't him. But to think that he wasn't capable of doing that, it's hard to say. It's very hard to say. Instead, he traveled, as you mentioned before, he traveled constantly from city to city, from public shul to public shul, giving drushes. The story actually how he even inspired the author of the Varde, who himself at the time, although he was planning to be a yeshiva student, because his father-in-law passed away before he got married, he actually had to take on the burden of not just his family, but also his wife's family, as in his sister-in-laws, his brothers-in-laws, which were just children at the time. And he took on that burden, and he became like a fur merchant. He actually became very successful. And the way the author explains it, he went to a shiur, I think it was the city of Memel, and he heard 14 shiurim on the Sefer Mesilas Yesharim from Yisrael Salanter. And he said, after the 14th shiur, I knew I had to leave the business world, and he went back into the yeshiva. He went back to the world of scholarship. So powerful was his Yisrael Salanter's effect of hashpah, of impact, that it really changed lives, it changed hearts. Now, why is this so? Why did Rabbi Yisrael seem to become this public figure, that he would diverge so tremendously from his Rebbe? The answer, I believe, I think, and this is, again, my theory, that it was very calculated. It was a very calculated decision. And this, maybe one could even say this is, to a degree, a philosophy or even, I guess, a value within the Muslim movement itself. And it maybe even be the most overarching, most active belief itself, to bring forth the popularization of ethical behavior to the public, to set standards of ethics. But to be more specifically, I want to explain, create a bikush. The word that we use within the Muslim world is called a bikush. What's a bikush? A desire to grow from your oxidated state of observance. People very often find yourself in a certain point over here, and you say, okay, I'm good here. Said that's someone who says, here's where I am, I'm good here, and I would never say it myself, but I'm just quoting Salante. That person has never drifted farther away from God. To say that I am okay, it means that you're not okay. It's a fascinating thing, because it's a very striking thing. It hits you in the heart because, wait, I'm not okay. I thought I was okay. I thought I was doing fine. I do this, I learned this period of time, I learned that amount, I do this, but you're not fine, because that's the entire operating ideal that a person should have, is the desire to do more. Now, more could mean 2 minutes more of learning. It could mean 3 minutes more of learning, but the overarching idea is that I want to do more, that I want to be more than I am, that I don't accept the way that I am currently, I want to be more. And it shows desire to create that as an essence of what a person should be striving towards. But not just that it should be, excuse me, I apologize, not just to be a thing that you do, as in it's an option to do, but something that became a standardized concept. Now, why?
Say that if you're not going up, then you're automatically going down.
Exactly. That's what we say. And it's. I just wanted to make one point, by the way, because we actually have a testimony about Rabbi Sol himself, that the way Rabbi Sol dressed was nothing short of regal. There's a story I read. I don't remember exactly where it was, but the story goes that somebody was studying in the Mussar in the yeshiva hall, and he hears somebody come in. A bunch of people are standing up, and they jump up right away. And he turns to the left, and he sees this man dressed immaculately with, like, the felt the pels. I think Rabbi Sol Lau has something very similar to that. The felt, which looked nice, right? It still looks nice. Beautiful, clean hat, 100% pristine. And again, that totally diverges from the way his Rebbe dressed, which sounds like he almost looked like a hobo. Why did he do that? Because again, it's the idea of bringing something and making it palatable to the public, making it something which is desirous that other people should be able to appreciate. The answer to this question, as I said before, now, I apologize. So let's take a step back over here. This is a question that I get very often, which is, what's the big deal about the Muslim movement? You have the Chovas Halevavos was written, what period of time? It was written in the 1300s. The Mesil Shalom was written, if somebody help me, someone correct me, I think it was written in the 1600s. This is not a new concept. The Orch Tzadikim, I think, goes back to possibly some people claim the 1300s, 1500s, different reports. It's not like a new concept that Mussar should be learned. I would hope that. Ethical concepts it's not a new concept to learn Mussar. So what did the Mussar movement kind of create over here? So as mentioned previously, personalities like Rav Zilda were not new in the history of Jewish people. Many people tried to become pietists and to even create groups of pietists, right? Rabbi Yehuda Chassid of the Hasidah Ashkenaz to come back to the land of Israel. The Ramchal, as I mentioned previously, he's part of a group of people that studied, and they said, we're giving all of our schuts, all of the merit from our Torah, we're giving it all to the public. But it was a group of maybe 5 or 6 people at most. The answer is that the Mussar movement was a populist Mussar movement. It's very interesting. I'm saying over here a novelty. I'm saying a bit chiddush. Why? Because to a degree, when people are doing their own personal avodas, their own personal working on themselves and the service of God, it's left up to the person. It's left up to the personal domain. If it's not part of the public sphere that people are saying, well, is that Gaiva? Is that Mussar? Are you not getting groups and towns and cities of people that are actively involved in these questions? It's left up to the personal domain, and therefore some people do, some people don't, and that's why you get, to a degree, you'll get by definition and by default, you'll have yechidim, you'll have individuals doing these types of things, like things that we're doing. But to create the mass movement, it needs to be standardized. Now let's explain. That setup previously, before B'Sul Sadr came along, it works perfectly. If in consonance together with that element, there's also a strong and robust culture of Torah surrounding it. You can have the private tzaddikim doing their own thing, they're involved in their own personal affairs, and the Rav of the city performs his affairs, and the people are involved in their parnasa, their jobs, and their work, and everything they're doing, and that's the engine of day-to-day life, and that works perfectly as long as it's working. However, though, what happens when the winds of enlightenment start blowing through these previously sealed communities? What happens when people start questioning the most basic axioms that you had for 100 to 1,000 years in some of these places? Now, of course, things change, and there's always a certain development of culture here and there. But what happens at that period of time? Then you stop even having the personal tzaddikim. Everything works together as a fine-tuned machine, but as long as it's working together in consonance. The minute not, everything falls apart. But so felt that the times have changed. That yes, you can have the tzaddikim, they're doing their own private things, but that's from the old method now. That's from the old school. They're only able to do that as long as the world around them is functioning. But now is the time to affect public change, to bring groups of people together to study Mussar out loud. The term is called Sfasayim Dokos, lips of flame, to take one pasuk, to take one verse in the Torah, or it could be in the Tanakh, it could be in a Mussar Sefer, and to repeat it again and again. Leiv Tahor, Baroli Elokim, right? To say that again. God, give me a pure heart. To say it constantly. The idea was, by doing that, it would, of course, affect our subconscious and affect our actions. Now, in short, Rabbi Yisrael desire to codify and institutionalize ethical precepts, to be on par with other aspects of halacha. To the extent, actually, very interestingly enough, he tried to get one of his students to write a sefer called the Sefer Shulchan Aruch Hamidot. Sefer Shulchan Aruch Hamidot. To codify the laws of Gaiva. How do you codify the laws of Gaiva? These things are almost nebulous to a degree. How do you define kinna when someone has jealousy? When someone's frustrated, how do you codify something like that? It's so vague. But we so felt that that's the problem. Specifically because it's so vague, it's hard to kind of pinpoint exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And you wanted it to be, he envisioned a concept that you have on your library bookshelf. You have the Shulchan Aruch and the Shulchan Aruch Hamidot. And when you have a problem with Dinei Mamonis, a problem with monetary laws, you look in the Shulchan Aruch what to do. And then when you think, well, should I do that? You open up the Shulchan Aruch Hamidot and say, well, maybe I'm actually being a little bit, too envious. Really, that's really what Mr. Salanter wanted. And to a degree, this happened in one particular sphere within halacha. What's this example? And to a degree, you also see this revolution. Well, I'm sorry, what?
Lashon Hara?
Exactly. I see my friend here is on the ball. We see the halachas of ethics were codified in one way by the Chofetz Chaim in his absolute magnum opus, the Shmirat HaLashon, Shmiras HaLashon. Did the Chofetz Chaim invent the laws of speech? Absolutely not. Not at all. Rather, by setting the laws down in an easy and understandable form, he made Lashon Hara a cultural concept, which is the point that I want to harangue a little bit. When we say Shmiras HaLashon or Shmirat HaLashon or Lashon Hara, everybody knows, at least people that are relatively educated understand, it means laws of bad speech, of slander, and of gossip, and all these things. It's a cultural concept. You don't have to say anything more once I say Lashon Hara. It's understood. Mr. Salanter wanted the same exact thing. When it comes to gaiva, when it comes to somebody is being too proud, when someone has kino, someone is being jealous, everyone wants to understand all the precepts that are involved in it. It's a whole pekel, as we say in Yiddish. It's a whole bag, which means you pick up the bag, a lot of things are included in it. In this vein, Reb Sol wanted to turn the precepts, as we said, as standards, which is very important. This was the desire of Reb Sol Salanter. Now, let's take a step back a little bit. Reb Sol Salanter intended, I guess, to make a mass movement, and almost it seems to have come up short. What he envisioned was to create Batei Mussar, to create houses of study of Mussar, only for Mussar. Not for you want to come in and learn Tanakh, not going to happen. You want to learn Gemara? No, there's a base measure for that. He wanted to build and to create Batei Mussar. A person can come in just to think about ethical concepts. So, I mean, last time I was in, nothing. I'm not going to say anything about any bad names. Elul, Hashem should help us. In Kategor, Nasa Snegar. But when's the last time anybody here was in a base Mussar? Was in a house of Mussar? Now I try to make my house a house of Mussar. This is my office. I try, but you know what? We're not doing it. So one could theoretically argue that Yisrael came up a little short on that. And I mean, I'm not going to be the one to say that. I'm not going to be the one to say that. And let's even take a step back further. Yisrael wanted also to collect laymen and balabatim to be his pushers. As everyone understands, if you look at historical movements, if you look at cultural movements in America in particular, the Agudas Yisrael of America would not have gotten off the ground if it was purely a top-down movement, where it's just the rabbis telling everybody what to do, because you need people to listen. When we say Ein Melech Below Am, there's no nation, there's no king without a nation, because who's going to listen to you? You have to have people listening to you. So the balabatim, the laymen, are the ones that take that message, that bring it forth, that really institutionalize it and create that institution. And Rabbi Yisrael, to a degree, he had collected a large amount of balabatim. One of the most notable ones is actually the Kamen Zev Wazotsky. He's the tea magnate. Anybody that drinks tea, I guarantee you, yeah, okay, Earl Grey, I don't know, in English here, it's the Wazotsky tea. Yes? And the idea is that yeah, and as you mentioned previously, also the Alter of Navardik also himself was at the time a layman. Yes, he learned in yeshiva, but he was trying to collect these students. There's a famous story actually once. I think it was even Mr. Wazotsky, who, by the way, he himself learned in Volozhin. So let's not pretend like he had no concept of Torah and anything. He was not a nobody. He himself was a tremendous person. He was also a tremendous Zionist. He was one of the really big supporters of the early Zionist movement.
They moved to South Africa, the Wasotsky family, no?
I saw Mr. Glassman perk up a little bit when I
Is that true, Mr. Glassman?
Which family?
Wasotsky tea?
There was a Wazotsky. Yeah, sure there was. Yeah.
Yeah. So Wazotsky himself, so now it's not even run by a Wazotsky. It's run by a grandson, a great grandson of a married in. If I remember correctly, I don't know the exact Shalshelas Hadoros to that. Now, the Muslim movement seems to have only caught on, by the way, which is the point I want to touch on. It only seems to have caught on within the environs of the yeshiva. Now this begs a question, which is, if it's a populist movement and he's trying to get it all over the world, why in the world are you institutionalizing it in the yeshiva? Could you think of it any more? Yes, it is a meritocracy. I agree with you, but it's also a aristocracy to a degree within the Jewish world. And do you think you can make cultural change emanating from the yeshivas? And this may be largely true, that the vast cultural revolution that Rizal envisioned did not come to pass, specifically because it kind of only stuck within the yeshiva environment. However, though, I want to suggest something like this, and I think this kind of helps us appreciate, for the Litvaks that are here, to appreciate the Lithuanian perspective on life, which is that Kimitzion Tetzei Torah, this idea of Kimitzion Tetzei Torah, that the Torah emanates from Zion, from Eretz Yisrael, doesn't just mean the land of Israel. Well, of course it does. That's the absolute understanding. But it means from the yeshivas. That if you truly want to make cultural change, it does start in the yeshivas. Now, this is a debatable point. I accept that fully. But I think you can kind of get a time for it, specifically because it was veered towards the yeshiva environment. I think that, and the truth is, what's the biggest proof? The proof is in the pudding. I'm talking to you right now about the Muslim movement. In 2020, I'm still talking about it. Yes, Mr. Glassman, you want to say something?
Can I just say something, Rav? Even to this very day, you have non from people that have tremendous covered for the Rabbonim, for Yeshivot. In fact, if you go to Ponevezh, you'll see the names of the donors, and a lot of them are from South Africa.
South African.
And a lot of them weren't on other families. A lot of them weren't even there from. And
exactly.
And I'll give you an idea.
So that's something specifically unique about the South African community, by the way. Let's not suggest it's only.
No, it's not unique about South Africa, but just to give you a personal thing, I learned in Rav Moshe Sternbuch's Kela Torah Center in Joburg, and there were some non-from families that donated to the shul in Joburg and in Hanof, and I know the families, but they had such kavod for the Rav and such kavod for Rabbonim, that it wasn't even it was like, what's the big deal? This is the way.
So you're touching on when you mention Rabbi Sternbuch, it really is a fascinating thing. Exactly that. He had a community that was, varied in different stages of, observance. And you have now, he's the head of, he's one of the head rabbis of the Badat Eda Charedit. And he himself is a zealot, but he's a truthful zealot. He'll be honest with certain things. But it's a fascinating idea. And it really, as you said before, bespeaks kind of the values of specifically the South African community, but in general, with the Lithuanian approach as well. Now,
sort of like what Golda Meir said, the synagogue that I don't go to is Orthodox. You heard that one, Lowell? Lowell, are you with us?
Okay, so let's continue a little bit. Now, it's very important because again, why is it unique in particular to the Lithuanian the Lithuanian style? Because as we mentioned before, as much as yes, the Mussar movement was a anti-establishment movement, but it was establishment because it was trying to work within the system. One of the changes that Rav Sladter and the Talmidim of Rav Sladter, the students of him, tried to institute was half an hour of Mussar in the yeshiva. That was it. And there was tremendous fights that broke out from that. I said I wasn't going to touch on the controversial aspects of it, but there were tremendous fights over it. Because why? Because to touch the yeshiva, to touch the holy schedule. And we're not handling yekas. We're not talking about yekas right now. We're talking about in general this idea that that it's only a half an hour, and yet people freaked out about it. And compare this to a degree to the Hasidic movement, which by definition, as we said before, was a kind of classic movement. It was trying to break the bonds of this judgmental aristocracy or meritocracy that was created around Eastern Europe. But what's funny though, human nature ultimately is still going to be human nature, because what do we find by Rav Nachman Breslov? And I understand there will be a lecture probably later on by Rav Nachman Breslov about Rav Nachman Breslov. But Rav Nachman Breslov himself, about less than a generation and a half, is railing against certain Hasidic rabbis at the time, because he's saying you're a racket, you've created these courts, you're totally against the entire concept that the Baal Shem Tov came along to try to break, which is this idea of the establishment, the group, the thing. This is the higher, this is the lower. What Rav Nachman Breslov was trying to do was to say, no, the Baal Shem was trying to totally to get rid of all these different things, So it's funny that we always, because why? Because I think human nature tends to gravitate towards hierarchies, towards trading systems. And I think that to a degree, maybe I'm biased, but the Lithuanian approach is maybe a healthier approach. Try to work within the system, try to change it, and yes, so you'll have tremendous fights over it. But at the end of the day, I think you'll come out healthier than breaking up the entire system, because you're gonna have to just break it again every 2-3 generations, because people are constantly like that. And even then, I have to even have a caveat on what I'm saying now, because the truth is, even within the Mussar movement, because as we said before, it's probably dead, and therefore what? And therefore, because it's dead, we need to have a reinvigoration of these ideals, because again, that's human nature. And I think to a degree, whether or not Rav Sladter succeeded, didn't succeed, I'm not the person I'll leave that to the historians to claim that. I think somebody said that only God and historians can change history. They can change the past, because it's all about interpretation. It's really depending on what was the goal of Israel. Obviously, Rav could never have fathomed that there would be the absolute destruction of the European world, the European mindset almost. This Muslim movement rose within the milieu of the Lithuanian culture, and it's very hard to then imprint it on any other type of culture. Every other type of culture is just going to be simply what? It's just going to simply be a carbon copy, but it's going to be a cheap carbon copy. Now, let's talk about something over here. I want to just give you a tam for within the streams of Mussar, and then we're going to close off just to give you an idea. Because I said before, I can't touch upon every single stream and here and there, but I'll tell you this. Within the 3 major streams within the Mussar movement is Kelm, Slabodka, and Nevardik. Right, Kelm was Simcha Zissel Ziv, who was a very close student of Rav Sladter, and then there was the Alter Slabodka, who was a student of, as we mentioned before, and also the Alter Nevardik. Now, each one of them stressed different things. So as we know, the famous midrash is by Yosef. I'm going to end with this. Is that Yosef, when he was sold by his brothers down to Egypt, it says that when he went down, Hashem he smelled the besamim. He smelled the besamim going down. Now, how do we interpret that exact story? In fact, he smelled the besamim. Obviously, Chaim Shmulevitz has this beautiful idea that you see God was still with him. I'm still with you. Even though you're going down to Mitzrayim, you're in a tough situation, I'm still with you. And I'm giving you the besamim as a reminder. But how would Kelm, Slabodka, and Nevardik? Kelm, whose focus was on order, exactly. So they said that by the Alter of Kelm, he put his hat on in a certain particular way, and it never moved throughout the entire day. Yerucham Lavavis explains. So I guess it's a weird type of thing, but that is Kelm. Kelm was exactitude, perfectness, everything the way it's supposed to be. So how they see from this story that God gave the spices to Yosef, that you see that God metes out punishment and or everything exactly to the degree. So that if it didn't need to smell bad, It didn't smell bad. It smelled good. That's count. So above is the focus idea of godless Adam, the greatness of man, that we're made in God's creation, that we are literally Tzel Elokim. But yet, what he said, how they say when Yosef went down, he smelled it with something. You see that even though a person could be in the mud, could be totally destroyed, could be totally ruined, as they say, he didn't take off his tie. That means to say that he didn't lose his fine sensibilities and he didn't notice the smell. He still noticed the smell. He still retained his essence of self. And the Vardik would say beautifully the absolute opposite. He would say, the Vardik stressed the idea of shiflas ha'adam, of the lowliness of man. He would say that when a man is down in the dirt and you're being sold, you're still noticing the smell. You're still so low, you're still noticing the smell. Come on, you have to accept your reality, the Vardik says. You're done, you're finished. Accept the reality. People live in fantasy lands and you're still smelling the smell. These three ideas, these three approaches of one story, of one episode in the Torah, one midrash in the Torah tells us really beautifully that this is a legacy that goes on forever, that we try, it lives within us, and it's something that it's important to try to find in our day, 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, to study Mussar, to think about these things on a deep level, to understand what we said before, bikush, a desire to not be stuck to where you are, however you are today, and it's very befitting for this month of Elul going into Yom Kippur. The idea of, ultimately, we want to be better. We're not happy where we are. And with that, I turn it over to the MC, and I really appreciate this opportunity to speak about it. It's absolute love, and I really appreciate everything. Thank you.
Wow.
I'm going to mute myself now.
This has been such an honor to have you, and it's really been, it's wonderful. And really, it's a lot of thought that you've given. And I'll just mention one thing that you mentioned about the Vilna Gaon. When I was in Lithuania, in Vilna in 2016, they've got a statue in Vilna. I don't know if you've been there, of the Vilna
I
Gaon.
wish.
Amazing, but without a yarmulke. So there you see a statue in the Jew. I think the government put up that statue, but they don't have a yarmulke on the Vilna Gaon. But he's very well known with a lot of the goyim there as well, and they if it's for financial reasons or for whatever reasons, but it's a cover to to his memory and to the Jewish community.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt.
Absolutely. Again, like we said before, his echoes, mamish, literally reverberate to this very day. To have such it's almost a nuclear bomb. You know, when we compare even the great scholars of today, let's say somebody mentioned recently that the Chacham Rav Ovadia Yosef had the mind of the Vilna Gaon. I love that. It's like, because that's the point. He became a cultural concept, which is exactly, to a degree, a similar concept, which is what Sol Slant was trying to create by the Muslim movement. Cultural concepts. So when we know what we mean when we say the Vilna Gaon, these things become catchphrases. So I can field questions or any type of comments
or questions to ask or comments to give.
Okay.
Yes.
Who's speaking?
Well, I think I'm speaking, but right, Rabbi Kasorla.
Yes, go.
I have a question and also a comment. Let me take off my headset. I just put this on so that people, my wife and granddaughter, wouldn't necessarily hear me in the kitchen. My question is,
What?
my question is, am I there? Right, my question is.
Don't worry, you're good.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. While it's wonderful that to have a movement to study Mussar ethics, I don't understand how it is possible to conceive of being religious without being ethical. However, since regular, normal people, I put normal in quotes, compartmentalize our realities, and like Alice in Wonderland, where the queen can say 6 impossible things before breakfast, that is certainly the case. I remember back when I was in New York, it was around 1986, Rav Pam of the Council of Torah Sages was addressing an annual conference of Agudat Yisrael. And he shocked. It got quieter than quiet when he said, we have a problem in our community. There is too much white collar crime and it's reached epidemic proportions. And I have a problem with that, not just because what will the Goyim say? Who cares what they say? Or even what will Hashem say, but what will you do? And I know that when I met a few years ago, we met in Haifa a lady who had just come on Aliyah, and she worked with an organization that represented tenants who were thrown out of their apartments or to prevent them from being evicted. And she said, you know, in our organization, of the 10 worst slumlords in New York, 8 of them are Hasidim. Now, for me, this is incomprehensible. However, we have a situation here in Israel where a man who's a billionaire has been placed by President Trump in an order in December 2017 on a list of international wanted criminals for what? Human rights violations. And what was his? He owns diamond mines in Africa and uses slave labor. He wears a black kippah and his father's a rabbi.
I know. I'm familiar with this. Yeah.
These
blood,
problems.
It's like almost blood diamonds, as far as I understand.
These problems don't go away. I'll give you one more example. I heard in terms of disconnect with reality, we have I'm a vatik of a Mizrahi Beit Knesset, which has been here for 50 years, and in Abu Tur. And we have a weekly talk by a rabbi who said a few weeks ago, so I was astonished. He said, you know, one of the reasons why the Holocaust may have happened is that Ashkenazi Jews talk in shul. So I heard this and I thought either this is insanity or this is evil, because a normal person does what? Because you talk in shul, 1.5 million children went up the chimneys and got burned. I said, well, I didn't say it, but I could have said, well, if you want to get onto subjects of why bad things might happen to good people, the fact is that for many decades, there were nice Jewish girls in Eastern Europe who answered ads to be au pairs in South America and went there and found when they got there, they ended up in houses of prostitution run by quote unquote religious ladies who were shidels. Now the rabbis knew this and they didn't say anything. So if you're looking for reasons why we're going to get it, if you want to play that game and blame the victim for his persecution, I can provide you for some reasons. So there's a real systems failure in a community where it's even possible to conceive of ethics as you can be religious without being ethical. But again,
so let me make 2 points.
It had all the watertight compartments at the bottom, except they made one problem, is they had no top. So water went over from one into the other and the other, and the other. The Titanic sank. That's my question, comment.
Okay, so I appreciate that. And it's true. And it's very disheartening because when you try to live a life of upstanding ethic, you know, a life of ethics, it's, you know, when you hear these stories, and I'm not even going to easily turn towards, well, the media likes to portray religion. I think it's too big of a cop-out. At this point in our history, I think it's too big of a cop-out. You're right. There needs to be a reinvigoration, a re-enlivening of not just for what they'll say, the Gentiles, the Goyim will say. It's about how could I do that? How could I be that type of person? God. It's ultimately about God. It's a God-centered religion. You know, the revolution that the Torah that the Torah had is a God-centered religion. The fact that at Sinai, that the laws are built purely and 100% focused totally on God. It's a God-centered religion. If you read, you know, the epics of Gilgamesh, if you read the stories, the Code of Hammurabi, it's all based off of a warlord coming and saying, pretty much putting his gut on the table and saying, okay, I'm going to kill you if you don't listen. And Judaism says, no. You're the children of God. Why would you ever do that? What's wrong with you? I mean, it also tells you I'll kill you too. Believe me, we have Leviticus for a reason. Thank God, you know. But it's a different approach. That was a revolutionary approach towards philosophy, towards ethics. And listen, I hate to break it to you, but we're in the galut still. Unfortunately, as much as I try to pretend that we're not, and I daven and I pray 100% that the temple, the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt. But this is not a surprise. You know, things are tough. It's only getting tougher. And when you have, again, that's why I said before, I think we're almost at a cultural moment where you're having all the elements that caused the movement of the Hasidic movement, of the Mussar movement, are lining up again. Those stars are lining up again, which I think the oxidation of, there's a culture that we're doing. I like to term it Jewish Bundes, like from Bundes. What I mean, a Bundes is basically somebody they went to the Yiddish theater, they spoke Yiddish. They absolutely not religious. They spoke them the Shabbat. They didn't care. So to a degree, also, again, I don't, it's Elu. I don't want to. God has enough. God has all the receipts, has all the history that we can to be able to point out. I'm not going to gain anything to point out all the foibles and bad things the Jewish people do. But I think Mussar also, to a degree, as much as it points to you in your chest and it says, where are you going? What do you want to be? It also gives you hope that you can be, because by definition, when it says, why aren't you the way you're supposed to be? By definition, it means you could be different. You could be different. That's the idea. And I think I want to leave off with a heartening desire. The heartening hope that we should have is that we could be better. But it starts with the individual. It starts with myself, and I. And this is also one of the dualities, by the way. I forgot to mention this duality, which actually is also allowed to coin. It's called davar v'hipucho, a thing and its opposite. The idea that I can be totally public and be totally private. The fact that I can be giving to you, I can be mechabed you, I can give you all the respect in the world, treat you like a king. And what? For me, I don't need anything. I myself, what happens? Most people are giving like this. They're giving to you one hand and they're accepting already with the other hand. They're already waiting for the reciprocation. If we can get to a point, I'm not myself. Listen, I struggle with the same thing. I'm also human. This is a human experience, but we all try to be better than we were the way before. And again, it starts with the personal sense of just because somebody else is doing something doesn't mean I do it. Can you imagine in American politics? Again, this is me, I guess, going off a little bit on a tangent and a rant. American politics, which I'm cued into, but I'm sure all politics is garbage, especially Israeli politics. It's all full of lies and deceit and everything, and playing gamesmanship in this. If simply people would just stop themselves and say, hey, just because you do that doesn't mean I have to do that. And the other person said, just because you do that doesn't mean I have to do that. You get to a point where people can actually be ethical and honest with each other. But the minute it's saying, it's reactionary. The minute it's saying, you did this, so I can do that. Well, you did that, so I can do this. Everybody just ends up with two bloody eyes. And nobody accomplishes anything. So I want to leave off with the hope and the desire to become better people. It's a lecture. It's obviously on the level of scholarship. But at the end of the day, it's also about the hearts and minds, as you started off. Desire to be better than we were the day before, the minute before. So, yeah.
Can I say something? Coming from Lithuania,
Absolutely.
my family's from Lithuania. Most South Africans are from Lithuania. And what you said, it really it struck a big chord here, because what's interesting in Lithuania, it wasn't only in the yeshivas, it permeated into the whole kehillah, into the whole community. And how do we know this? When the Jews fled from Poland in the beginning of the war, the Yidden of Lithuania on a whole were not wealthy at all. They were actually very poor in a way, but they accepted the Polish Yidden with open arms. And I've known families that really did. They accepted them with open arms. None were sent back. It was amazing. And
it's amazing.
Recently,
can I tell you? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I've met recently 2 Holocaust survivors, incredible people that did not have good, I don't want to speak also Lashon Hara now, but had very bad experiences with the Yiddish community in Switzerland, okay? And when I heard this, I was in shock, because in South Africa today, and it's always been, no Yid, however poor you are, the Kehillah, the Chevra Kadisha isn't just for burial, the Chevra Kadisha looks after the entire community. If you're down and out, there's a place for everybody to go and will be looked after. Not only that, there were poor people in Yovel, which was once the front kehillah, where Rav Steinbuch had his kehillah, where I was once, and it changed. It's now moved to the northern suburb. So people couldn't afford it. So the wealthy Yidden there bought a hotel, and they moved all the poor people from these areas into the hotel, and they were looked after by the Jewish community.
Tremendous.
Never had in South Africa people who were down and out. They were looked after. And this, where does this come from? It comes from Luther, from the Muslim, in a way, from the Muslim movement. It permeated into the people.
Let me just give you a taste. This is off the top of my head, so it could be I'm wrong a little bit on some details here. It's in a book called Go My Son. Actually, I may even have it literally by hope. Do I have it here? I don't want to waste your time. Yeah, I might have it, but it's going to take me forever to find it. So let me tell you like this.
I have it in my bedroom if you need it.
Okay, so the story goes, maybe you'll correct me. He was this man. He eventually moved to America, and he wrote his story of how he went through the war and his experiences in Europe in particular. And he writes over there, he was in yeshiva at the time, and he went to go visit his grandparents, who I think, again, I could be incorrect, was living in the city of Bialystok. Now, Bialystok was famous because they had the Novardka yeshiva. And he went to visit his grandparents.
I thought it was famous because of Joseph Conrad.
one of the starlights of that town. Now, so he went to go visit his grandparents. He went to visit his grandparents, and he get my thoughts. Okay, so he went to go visit his grandparents, and at the time he was with them, taking care of them. I guess they're the older age. He went to study in the local base medrash, and he sits in the base medrash, and he sees a young, he says, frail, skinny, and very hungry-looking boy who was looking with his head down. He would not look around. And coming from outside into the base medrash, and he sits down, and Mamish just starts learning out loud. And he was very taken aback by this, like a very weird experience, very weird, thing to be able to observe. Later on, when he goes back for lunch to his grandparents' house, he mentions to his mother, he says, that's our grandmother, I apologize. He said, Baba, I saw a bacher, something like this, or somebody, I don't know. A boy coming in skinny as anything, looks, silken eyes, was not looking around at all, and came in and learned straight right away. And he said, that's the yeshiva bacher. Here, he must be hungry. And you know why he doesn't look around? Because he's makbid on shmirat einayim. He doesn't want to see anything unclean with his eyes. Those people have to be respected. Take this food and bring it to the Beit Midrash. Unfortunately, listen, you can be in the most religious of communities in America and the world over. They'll say that kid's a weirdo. What is a sugar guy? Now, I'm not going to claim that response is the absolute norm of everybody. This is not. I'm not writing hagiography about the different people within Europe. But I think it's emblematic, and it tells you something about the certain underlying values, that they're respected, that somebody was keeping things to the nth degree, to the highest degree, and they respect it. Doesn't mean I have to do it. Doesn't mean it makes me feel bad, and I have to then. Because most people, they say, if I'm not doing it, that must be good. I mean, it must be a bad thing. So then what he's doing is a bad thing. It's respecting that people are striving. There's a world of bikush, of being desirous to do better than you were before, however that manifested. So it's like, wow, it's a tremendous thing. It's amazing. Let's give him some food to take care of it. So again, I have to run, but I really, really appreciate
thank you so much.
This opportunity to really...
What you said, that was every day. Some Bochrim would go to different homes and they'd eat at all the different homes.
Essentag. That's how it was. Essentag.
Ruben,
I really appreciate it.
Ruben, is there a comment from Rav Klein?
Yeah, probably.
I have to think about it.
Okay.
Okay.
Fine. So we can wrap it up, Mr.
We want to thank you so very much, really. It's been illuminating. It's been amazing. And your message is so strong. It's so beautiful, especially for Elul and for the new year. And thank you all for participating, and Lowell and Larry for organizing this. It's been such an honor and a privilege to be part of this. So we are extremely grateful.
It's been a real honor, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Also.
All the best.